Yeah. Well, good morning again. Nice to see you. We're here today with Edward Lasak, Ed and Lasak, and he is one of our microgiants experts, kind of not emeritus in the sense that he's old like I am, I guess, and in the sense that uh, he's a go-to person when we're talking about anything having to do with accounting and business valuation and that sort of thing. Today, we're going to pick his brain about a subject that happens a lot, but we don't see a lot of information out there for small business people. And that really has to do with what do you do and how do you approach buying a business. If you are the seller, of course, you've got a business, you'd like to sell it, and some of your prospects, if not your only prospect, might be internal employees. And how does the internal employee figure out how to make that work? And so you've got a little bit of tension in these kind of things, and we've run into some circumstances recently that are kind of ongoing that kind of point out the need for a little bit more expertise than typically the employee has. And I think it's fair to say typically the owner has too, because the owners don't have the expertise that we're talking about, which Ed's going to elucidate here, uh, you know, in just a moment. Um, this the timing is interesting because we are at this interesting crossroads between boomers wanting to retire and having younger generations coming up who would like to get into business, but they probably don't have the money. They may have the expertise and the wherewithal, to run a company, but they haven't been exposed to accounting, finance, certainly not business valuation very often, if ever. We just don't run into people who have a good sense for how to value a business at all, I would say, almost. And then, so these things tend to happen organically, and some of them work out to be kind of poor deals, and some of them are okay, and some work. But for the most part, I'm not sure that they tend to be as efficient or as well planned as they should be. And it's too bad because a lot of these deals don't happen as a result of them not being able to come up with some really a good plan on how to execute this so that it works for both parties. And part of that problem is that there aren't any third party people brought in. They just kind of do it on or maybe they'll talk to the business's accountant to get some numbers and rely on them. But that's really not the answer. So Ed, take us through some of your thoughts about this and give us a couple of pointers on what an owner ought to do to make sure that they're prepared to sell their business to uh, uh, even a family member, an employee, or maybe somebody close to them. That's where most of these buyers come from. They don't tend to show up, in the marketplace. So help us understand more about that, Ed.
Well, thank you, Ron, for that introduction. I kind of like to start off with the fact that you hear from business brokers, and that is 70% of the businesses that are up for sale don't sell. And I think that is an alarming percentage. And unfortunately, it means a lot of negativity for the employees that work there, the customers of that company, because companies usually have a useful life longer than the life of an owner. So for it to transition, that's really important. Otherwise, the business dies with the owner. And I think we see a lot of that. So the question becomes why aren't owners more prepared for this? And I think the number one reason is they really don't know what their business is worth, number one. and they don't have the time to prepare a plan to transfer the business to new ownership.
Mm.
And those are pretty compelling reasons why a lot of these businesses don't sell. So I'm perplexed. My whole life I've been wondering, why doesn't an owner prepare for sale? Because it's important to their family, to their employees, and to their customers. So I'm getting to the point right now. I'm thinking that the family members need to take a more active role, and the employees and the customers, and go back to the owner and say, well, what's going to happen when you leave the business?
Yeah, maybe put a little bit of
Maybe that will
friendly
kind of
pressure.
generate some type of enthusiasm and priority on this, because who wants to deal with a business that only has a limited life? I mean, a business is really important in many aspects of your business that you're working with, and you're relying upon them to do certain things. And if they're out of business, good luck. And the livelihoods of your employees, what happens to them? All of a sudden, you're out of the business goes under, and you'll sell your business, you'll liquidate your business piecemeal primarily for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the issue is. I think a lot of owners rely upon their CPAs and attorneys, and primarily for CPAs. CPAs are more involved with tax returns and past results. Selling a business, you're looking at the future and preparing yourself for the future. I don't think that that skill set is there. So bringing in somebody with has experience in selling businesses is really important, because even if you transfer it to people in your family, you got to have an idea what it's worth so that you can make the transition.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely right.
Do
And
you,
I think also the 70% that you mentioned is really quite astounding, I think. Um, I wonder how many small business people have any idea that only 30% of the businesses sell. And of course, of those 30%, I would imagine half of them are close to fire sales anyway.
yeah, you may be right, and it is it's one of those questions I just keep wrestling with, trying to figure out why there isn't more of a plan and a concerted effort by the owner to sell the business, and so that it can survive. So I think it starts with, first of all, understanding how businesses are valued, because we all know mostly the owner believes it's worth a lot more than what a willing buyer is willing to pay.
Yeah, I think
That's
that goes without saying
yeah.
almost.
That's why you have to look at valuation techniques to determine how an outsider would value your business,
Yeah.
because it's only worth what they're willing to pay, correct? So having a valuation done, and in valuations, they look at three different aspects. They look at the cash flows. Cash flows are king. What kind of cash flow is your business bringing in? The other option is to look at what similar businesses have sold for, but it's very hard to get that information. And as we know, not two businesses are not the same. They're all slightly different. It's a little bit different than selling real estate, where you get comps of houses pretty similar to what you're trying to sell.
Yeah.
So, and the biggest factor is this: you can't go down to a market and sell your business overnight. If you own stock in a public company, you can take your stock to the market, sell it, and get your cash the next day.
Mm.
And that is a real disadvantage of a small business. So the only way a small business can sell is it has to develop a plan, and it has to be religiously followed to make sure that they're creating the market, they're valuing it properly, so that when they're ready to sell, they have several buyers that are interested in buying, or family members. And therefore you should be able to strike a deal that is fair to the seller and the buyer.
Yeah. One of the things too that I think owners typically don't think about is that if they are, and we've spoken about this many times in the past, and we've got some great videos, and I'll just mention real quickly. Ed's 8 drivers to increasing your value is one of our most frequently listens to videos. And so you can find that on our channel. So you can go there and get real in-depth discussions about in fact, I think we did 8 programs on each driver. So we've got a very strong set of instructions really on how to go about doing that. But what I was going to mention is that if an owner is still working in the business on a day-to-day basis, then he is adding value that is going to go away. So the question is, how much of that goes away when he leaves, and does he take skills with him that nobody else in the company has? So we should probably say we're talking about ideally, we're talking about businesses where the owner is pretty well backed away and is not required on a day-to-day basis. And if that's the case, then you have to devalue the company quite substantially in some cases in order to be able to kind of get to something you could buy. The other side of this is that if an employee or a set of employees is trying to buy that business, you have to take a look at what their skill levels are. They may have skills that are required for the business, and you don't know if they're going to stay. So you have several other aspects that can change when the business owner changes, which of course affects the value. So Ed, I know you've got kind of a list of things that the owner should be doing in order to be able to get ready. You want to go through some of those things?
Yeah, sure. The first thing they need to do is to get a valuation of what the business is worth. And there's a lot to that because you'll be able to understand the methodologies that are being used to value your business. And once you have that understanding, you can use that to your advantage and make improvements to your business so that you can sell it for a higher price. And not only for a higher price, but ensure that you're going to sell it because it's something that someone wants to buy.
Yeah.
So I really think it starts with the valuation. And once you go through that process, I think you're ready to start thinking about, okay, what are the strengths, weaknesses, threats, and opportunities of my business? And you can put together a nice little document there. And from that, you can develop a strategic plan for the next several years on how you're going to optimize and improve the business for sales so it's ready to go.
Of course, everybody should have a plan that they're rotating through, but in this particular case, you're I think you're suggesting that you build a plan so that you can look at those things, but then that's also becomes a roadmap for the new buyer, right?
Absolutely. It's a roadmap for you to optimize, and it's a roadmap for whoever buys the company. But remember one thing, that's probably the most important thing. We've talked about this many times. Your value, people buy a business. They don't buy the owner. So as part of the strategic plan and getting ready for the business, the owner has to step back and do a succession plan. Who's going to take over for him? Hopefully a couple different people. And that way, the company is basically operating without the owner. And that's when people from the outside really get interested because, again, they're buying the business and not the owner. And I think that's one of the major reasons why 70% of the businesses don't sell. What do you
Mm.
think of that, Ron?
Yeah, no, I think you're right on the money. And I think also too, if we're kind of ready to move into it, I think that there's some interesting considerations to develop people in your own business that would be able and willing to take the business over. And again, very early, this might be part of your strategic plan, is to say we're going to do this, 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 but that includes bringing along a particular person or a group of people that are going to be willing to stay in the business, they're going to be happy with the business, and run the business and grow the business. And maybe that's one person. There are things that person or that group of people needs to know too. What are a couple of things that they should look at to make sure that they can make a good deal that's sustainable? You want the business to be sustainable, uh, even while you're trying to give fair value to the owner.
It's very important. Valuation is based upon potential future cash flows. The better your business runs, the better the leadership you have, the more value it represents in a valuation. It's all related. So if the business owner is only relying upon himself and he's going to be exiting the business, cash flows will be significantly impacted and will reduce the value. But more importantly, people want to buy a business that they're not relying upon the owner. And I really think that is a major issue when owners aren't willing to develop the people below them to take over the business.
Mhm.
And if it's a small business, a lot of times your best buyers, you're kind of creating a market because there is no market to sell your business. So you have to create your own market,
Yeah.
which means you have to have a list of potential individuals that are willing to invest in your business. And you have to look at your employees because that's your number one opportunity. Because if you can't operate a business, the business isn't worth very much. So the people that are in the business have an opportunity with some right counsel from outside of the organization to buy that business and continue it on so that the legacy of the business is continued and the customers are protected and family members are still getting checks to support their lifestyles.
So how is a person who's maybe been a worker and maybe he's got a house with a little bit of equity, um, but probably hasn't saved a huge amount of money, not enough money to buy a whole company. How does a new buyer finance this company? What are some of the methods for finance?
Well, one of them is you can go to the bank like in an ESOP and sell it to your employees, but that's a pretty big business when you're talking about ESOPs.
Mhm. Yeah,
So you kind of have to have an incentive program for your employees that as they add value, they are gaining some type of a benefit, some type of cash that can be used to buy the business. But a lot of times it's going to require some type of a loan that they're either with the seller directly or with an outside party, and that loan will allow that owner to exit. And a lot of times the banks aren't really willing to give out a lot of money. That's for sure. It's pretty hard to get a loan from a bank.
yeah.
But you can get a loan from the seller, so it could be a win-win. And the seller can be getting checks for the next 10 years or so. But the key is that the business has to perform. And so you got the buyer and the seller both relying upon the cash flows of the business.
Right. Now, so it seems to me, in my experience, an awful lot of these transactions take place because the seller, the former owner, has carried back the loan. And that's because, as you mentioned, it's hard to get financing when you have a brand new owner who may not have enough equity to be able to cover the loan and probably doesn't have that much equity. So the only way they can get that is through the owner. What are some of those, how are some of those structured? What do they typically look like when the owner takes back the note?
Well, they're pretty simple. Okay, you're going to pay me so much per year for so many years. That's probably the most typical way of doing it. Um, and it works. It
Yeah,
works. As long as the business keeps producing, that's why it's in the owner's vested interest to have somebody that's really good at taking over the business. Without that person being able to take over the business, the owner has very little options if there's no market to sell the business, and
right.
that's why a lot of them go
Yeah.
out of business. So yeah, I think you have to be reasonable, and that comes right back to the valuation. What is the valuation of the company? What is it worth? What's a fair representation? And then once you come up with that number, how are you going to construct the loan so that it's fair for the buyer as well as for the seller? That's where we talk about outside influence coming in and helping people connect the dots so it's a fair deal for both. That's really important. And I think there's a real opportunity now for outside investors to get involved.
Mhm.
If someone is able to run a company very effectively and it's been a very successful company over the years, I'm willing to invest, that's for sure, because it makes sense. And if I invest, it would have to be with someone who really understands how to run that business. Might not have the cash to buy it, but maybe there would be room for a minority investor to partner with the buyer to get the deal done.
So that's another way to structure the loan is to bring in some other owners, maybe
Yes.
temporarily, but they've got to be able to have a return on their investment. What kind of a return on investment would an outside investor expect? Well, and as far as that goes, what about a return on investment for the new buyer? What should they be looking for?
Oh, that's a great question. Now, let me ask you, if you were going to invest in a small business, what kind of percentage would pique your interest?
You're going to turn it back
I'm
on.
going to turn it around because I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I think we have to, and I don't mean to drag this but out a little too much, but I think you have to take a look at, well, what kind of return do small businesses get? And I think that uh, I always took a look in my businesses over the years. I always took a look at what the internal rate of return was to determine whether or not I was, really generating money based on what was already invested in the business. So that's kind of you know, the easiest way just to kind of look at it is like how much money are you making in profit and how much of an investment do you have in the business, including retained earnings, say. So that in a situation like that, because of leverage, I was always really able to get between 20 and 60% return on investment.
Oh,
So, and now the question is, and I've had people say, oh my gosh, I mean, that you must have gotten rich. Well, the investment wasn't very big. It might have been several $1,000s, So no, you're not getting rich, but you have to have that. I think you have to have that, and small businesses should expect, I don't know, a minimum of 20% because you're not going to hit it necessarily. You're going to try to hit it, but you have to mitigate the risk. The risk is enormous in small business.
by the way, that was an excellent answer. Let me look at it a little bit differently. If you invest money in the stock market, you expect to get what, 10, 11%
Yeah.
over time. Okay, you're dealing with big companies that are highly regulated. They have excellent financial reporting and controls. So that's kind of your base, right? Or you could invest in security, government securities, where there's hardly any risk on your investment.
Hmm.
You invest in a small business, the risk is tremendous.
Yeah.
So in essence, you would really require at least a 20 to 25% return on your investment to invest in a small business. And a lot of people call that the cost of capital
Hmm.
for a small business. That's what you expect to receive in return.
Right.
And if it's a 10% business if it's a business earning 10%, obviously I'm not interested. You wouldn't be interested, and probably nobody else would be interested. So you're right. Yeah, you got to be able to generate a significant return on an investment. And it happens all the time. And these small businesses can be very, very profitable, as we well know, if they're run correctly.
Yeah. Oh, they can, and they're capable of doing those kind of numbers. And I think that I should probably qualify a little bit to say that if I was going to be investing in a company that was very well established, 20, 30, 40-year experience, had a really good management team that maybe had been in place for 5 or 6, 7 years without the owner, and had a little bit of a moat strategy. In other words, they're alone in the marketplace. There aren't a lot of competitors. They make basic stuff. And then in a case like that, I might be willing to say, okay, well, I'd look at 15, 20%, in something like that. But if you're talking about a company that needs revival, that requires, a few, two or three or four people who are highly skilled to do it, they could get sick, they could die. Of course, you can do things for risk management on that. But then I'm starting to get, into the 40, 50, 60% range. If I'm going to be funding a business that's new or a new idea, then it's sort of like, well, it has to have at least a potential of a several hundred re percent return on the initial investment, because you're going to lose money on 8 or 10 out of 12 investments, and you have to in order to be able to break even. And now that's what I've been told by angel investors, that they only look at, 1 in 12, and only 1 in 12 actually makes money. But when they make money, they're returning enough money to have paid for the losses of the other 11. So in other words, they have to have a huge upside, where you're going to go from $300,000 to $3 million in a matter of 2 or 3 years, and it's got an upside of multiple millions of dollars. So so there's a difference there, and in each case, you're really right. The cost of capital is much, much higher based on the profile of the company. And so I think, and the important reason to bring this up is that deals don't happen because parties, one party doesn't understand that the other party is being rational about this. Because, the uh, the business owner will say, well, you can't make that much. I never made that much money. You shouldn't have that expectation in terms of that kind of return. Well, okay, lower the price then. So,
And so it's the price is based upon the return,
yeah, yeah.
and
And
that's
so you look at the price that you've paid for it, and that's assuming everything is exactly the same. But oh my goodness, what a difference the owner can make if they have relationships with vendors or relationships with customers, and they choose maybe not to cooperate, or they just don't want to do business anymore. I have a former client, did work for him for about 12 years. They sold their business, doing 15 to 20 million dollars in a very, very basic industry, and had grown. We had grown them really quite a lot over the 10 years or so, and they sold to a major international company. as soon as they came in and took over, they had their ideas on how they were going to do things, of course, and they had a lot of other similar plants around the country, around the world, and so they kind of just went with their own. Well, as it turns out, 5 years later, almost all of their old customers had left. And that's because they weren't getting that personalized service. They weren't getting the turnaround that they needed. The quality had dropped a little bit. Now, the big company may not care at all because they were feeding other kinds of business to this particular plant, and they might be just fine. But the point there is if you'd bought the business as a small business, as a standalone business, and the same thing happened to you, your business would have dropped by 60 or 70% because you didn't know how to deal with the customers. You didn't understand the business. So you go from an extremely profitable business that had made the owners millionaires to one that is really struggling with a large facility that has a lot of expenses, and you have to pay high dollar wages to these highly skilled craftsmen to do the work. You can ruin a business there. So what kind of expectation would an individual owner or a small group of owners have? They've got to start at about 20% or something like that and have to make sure that they maintain exactly what the previous owners had done. The big guys, they probably came in and said, we don't really care that much if we get 8%, 7 to 6%, we'll be fine because we can always backload it. We'll figure out how to fix it with all of our resources. So, it's a totally different kind of thing. Now, having said that, did the big company come in and overpay? No way. No way. They came in, they negotiated hard. They spent years getting the financial statement in shape so it would be attractive to this kind of a buyer. And when it comes down to it, they didn't nearly get the price that they thought it was worth for themselves, but that's the way the market works. And so that's why the education, I think, is so important for the buyer and the seller, especially small businesses where you really have people that have never bought and never sold a business before.
That's right. You spend your whole life building a business, but you have no experience in selling a business.
Yeah, that's right.
And if you go to people that don't know how to sell a business, you're not really going to the right advisors to help you sell your business and prepare your business for sale.
Hmm.
I think people get in a rut. They don't know who to contact because their trusted advisors aren't really up to snuff on this type of an opportunity.
Yeah.
So that's really important is bringing in the right people. We always talk about that, and that's really important. And it seems like a lot of small business owners are reluctant to do that. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's because if they don't have the time to deal with people, they're just not interested, or they don't want to reach out and find new things out. But what I've been really interested in recently is on a few business opportunities that are out there, talking to different people from different backgrounds and getting different ideas on the value of that business and what they would do with it and how would they sell it, et cetera. It's really, really interesting that the expertise from these different companies is quite different.
Hmm.
And so again, I always uh, caution companies to not just be so insular that you're just so focused on your business, you're not looking outside. To me, a lot of value is by talking to people outside of your business and finding out what opportunities are available that you might be able to partake in. And I think a lot of businesses, they just don't have the time to do that. And that's what they're really missing out on, a big opportunity to really add value to their company.
Yeah. I think that's probably a symptom. A business owner can take a look at himself and say, if I don't have the time to get out there and talk to a lot of people, have these conversations, spend the time doing a value and the money to doing the valuation, and be planning on potentially a 5 year ramp up before they go on the market to get ready. And of course, it'll take 6 or 7 years potentially to sell the business. So, I mean, if you're 60, it's time to start thinking about selling your business. If you're 55, it's time to start thinking about selling your business. And I suppose if I were doing that, I'd say, okay, at 55, I have to get full value because I can't afford to retire if I don't get the full value. But as you get older, you're saving more money, your income's going up, your wealth is going up. The closer you get to retirement age, the lower the price of the business it potentially ends up going because you've done better by maintaining the profitability of the company and by investing, but you're going to need to close this business out sooner. And so, but if you do it the other way around, where you spend time planning to sell your business, then you should be able to get the full value of the business because you've done it the right way. Now, having said all of that, if you don't have the time to do that, you're not ready to take that step number one, which is you have to have management people run your business. You have to be able to step away from your business, and if you can't take the time to get prepared to sell your business, you're not even you're not to the first base yet. You don't have a management team that can run your business, and therefore your business is not worth much. So it's sort of like if you say you don't have time, you are not ready to sell your business.
That's correct. And recently I found that I've been adding a lot of value to clients by making those calls. For whatever reason, they won't make the calls to potential experts out there that can really help them. So it's really interesting. Every time we make a call and we talk to people, we learn a lot. Doesn't cost us anything,
Mhm.
and it helps us refine our plan of what we want to do next. One of the things I want to caution people against, and that is relying upon one buyer. If you're relying upon one buyer, you have a lot of risk in the situation because when it comes right down to selling anything, you got to have a market. You have to have more than one person interested. Otherwise, you're not going to strike the right deal.
That's right. Just like when you're buying a house, if there are other purchasers, you're not going to lowball it. You're going to give them, if you want the house, you're going to give them something you think they'll take. Same
Absolutely.
deal. Yeah.
I see sometimes people fall in love with certain buyers, and then I look at what they're offering, and it's not competitive, and there's all kinds of red flags around the deal. But for some reason, they have developed a relationship that it's hard to break that thinking so that they get the right deal. And a lot of people, the other thing I would like to say is when people get a letter of interest, um, that doesn't mean anything. And all it is a commitment to take your business off the market and do further negotiating. And a lot of people think when they get the letter, they sold the business. And it's a rude awakening about all the different adjustments that could be proposed. You could start off with a certain number and have it down to 50% of that number really quick.
Yeah.
And you're relying upon one
The
potential
people who
buyer.
are people who are used to buying businesses know all the tricks, and they put in things that sound very reasonable and maybe are reasonable. But the owner hasn't stopped to think about, well, what's the impact of, executing this deal? And then the price just keeps coming down, and there's this adjustment and that adjustment. And so that could really change the dynamics. You're absolutely right. So I have one more question for you, and that is, what what do you think about those who have a designated employee who's maybe come along, maybe been mentored to run the business, and the owner is willing to sell the business and give terms, and they can come up to a price, but the owner wants to stay involved at some level because they want to make sure that the new buyer doesn't ruin the business so that they get paid. What are the dynamics that go on there, and what's acceptable, and where are the warning flags?
Boy, it sounds like a pretty good opportunity to me. Keeping the former owner involved in the business, I think could be a real plus.
Hmm. Mhm.
And but you got to make sure you can work with someone like that because it's like a marriage, and what 50% of marriages don't survive. So it's a little bit of a risk there. But you that's all got to be thought of beforehand. If it doesn't work out, how are we going to divorce without getting all these attorneys involved and creating all these big legal bills? Kind of think of things logically up front. You kind of know people you can work with, and you kind of know people you can't work with. And so you got to use that intuition, but you also have to have safeguards in the contract to make sure that if it isn't working, there's a way out for both that is mutually acceptable.
Yeah. So work with a professional, someone who's a pro at valuation. And I'll mention at this point that you're certified in that area through I think it's ACPA,
AICPA, that's right.
and and get a lawyer involved in this final agreement. That's a very important thing too. So
Oh, that's extremely important because some of the companies I've been dealing with, they're pretty high-powered buyers. They have a lot of money and they do a lot of these transactions.
yeah,
They have the best attorneys on earth.
yeah, right. And they come
You
in with
have to
their
find
own, yeah, they're the ones who present the contract as part of the purchase agreement.
exactly. So you have to find someone who's knowledgeable that's going to defend you and make sure that it's going to be a fair deal. And you have to find those people. That again, that's a call. You got to call various attorneys and find out which ones have the skill sets that you need to make the deal happen. But they will save you a lot of money and a lot of grief and a lot of pain in the long run.
Yeah,
Whenever there's a potential legal issue, you'd rather deal with it up front rather than 2 minutes before you're signing the paperwork.
yeah, good. All good advice. Thank you so much, Ed, for your expertise and it was good conversation. And I hope those of you out there who may be in this situation have found this very useful. We can say through a lot of years of experience in doing this that each one of these things is extremely important and can create more wealth for you as you sell your or buy your business. So thanks very much. We'll see you all next time.